In October 1868, a sugar planter from eastern Cuba freed his enslaved workers, handed them machetes, and declared war on Spain. His name was Carlos Manuel de Céspedes. Within weeks, every major planter who joined him did the same thing, freed their workers, burned their estates, and signed over their assets to a common fund. That is the story that most Cubans know. Here's the part you were not told. Céspedes gathered 37 other planters at a sugar estate called La Demajagua in eastern Cuba. And these men signed a document. They agreed to pool all of their assets, land, money, mills, into a shared fund for the revolution. To the untrained eye, this might sound like communism, but it's not. Structurally, this was a limited liability partnership. This was not a revolutionary invention, and it was not unique to Cuba. A limited liability partnership is a standard European commercial structure used by merchants and bankers across the Atlantic world. The question is not whether Cubans were brave enough to sign it. They were. Each man's personal exposure was limited to what he put in. The real question is who taught them that this was the way to organize a revolution? And what does that particular structure mean about who would collect, win or lose? The earliest known use of this kind of contract goes back to 1072 in Venice. Venetian merchants called it the colleganza. It is also called the commenda. Specifically, you contribute capital or property into this shared pool and you receive a defined share of the outcome. Regardless of what happens, your personal liability is bound to what you put in. A merchant who agrees to travel signs a contract with an investor who stays at home. The investor fronts the capital and the merchant gives his labor and his loyalty and goes travel. If the voyage is successful, they split the profits. 75% to the investor who stayed at home and did nothing, and 25% to the traveling merchant. If the voyage fails, the investor loses what he put in. But he does not lose his life, his ship, his house, or anything of his other businesses. It's called limited liability. This is the direct institutional ancestor of the joint stock company, the limited liability partnership, and the modern merchant bank. The core structural feature that you see repeated over and over throughout history is a group of investors put money into a shared fund and they have a defined share of the outcome. If things go badly, their liability is no more than what they put up. This is the same legal structure as the Rothschilds' 5-office business model, the Cuban junta property contribution model, the Irish Fenian bond model, and every other 19th century revolutionary finance structure. This structure did not travel by osmosis. It traveled through 3 overlapping networks: Masonic lodges, American merchant banking relationships, and European liberal exile circuits. Every one of those networks was a controlled technology. The Masonic lodges issued charters and could revoke them, and exile circuits were used and leveraged as intelligence operations. The Cuban planters adopted the limited liability structure because they were already inside it. José de la Luz y Cabrillo studied at the University of Havana and then traveled to Europe and the United States. He is acclaimed as the father and founder of Cuban intellectual life. When he was in Germany, he worked directly with Alexander von Humboldt. Alexander von Humboldt was a Prussian scientist and explorer who had spent 5 years traveling the Americas. He is the one who mapped the entire Caribbean, measured its sugar economy value, and documented the scale of enslaved labor that was making it run. Not as an expose for human rights abuses, but to understand mathematically exactly how many slaves it took to run a plantation. He was one of the most politically connected intellectuals of his time. He had direct access to heads of state from Simon Bolivar to Napoleon to the King of Prussia. This is not accurate. Somebody update Wikipedia, because he is not just a German polymath. He was the structural architect of a transatlantic network of liberal reformers who believed that colonial economics needed to be even more structured, even more extractive. and he had the relationships to move these ideas across borders. Luz worked directly for him and then returned to Cuba in 1831 and opened El Salvador School in Havana. He taught in that classroom for the next 30 years, and every major figure from the 1868 revolution passed through his classroom or his orbit. He was a political transmitter, and his curriculum ran on Enlightenment philosophy, liberal political economy, and the institutional models of the American Republic. This is an education designed to produce a Creole governing class who understood property, law, and corporate structures. The students he produced, though, were not taught about corporate partnership structures. They didn't need to be. They were educated into them. Céspedes took his baccalaureate in Havana and then went to Spain to read law. While studying at the University de Sevilla, Céspedes was admitted to the Freemasons, and he used Masonic lodges as organizational infrastructure when he returned to Cuba. This is where education on things like limited liability partnerships is traveling. The lodges in Cuba at this point were chartered by the Grand Lodges of Pennsylvania, Louisiana, South Carolina, and the Grand Orient of France. Miguel Aldama was the son of Domingo del Aldama, whose Matanzas sugar estate appears directly in Moses Taylor & Co.'s ledgers as suppliers. Moses Taylor is a New York merchant and banker and one of the wealthiest men of that century. He controlled nearly 1/5 of all commercial trade between Cuba and the United States. For him, this generated $3 million a year in today's money. He sat on the board of Citibank, New York. He became the president of the bank in 1855, and he held that position until he died in 1882. What's more, though, is his firm was not just buying sugar from Cuba. They acted as investment advisors to Cuban planters. He sent them templates for bylaws, company structures, and commercial organizations. He purchased American securities on their behalf. He arranged education for their children. By 1872, he had invested nearly $3 million of Cuban planter money into American industry. The Moses Taylor papers are at the New York Public Library. There's 316 boxes. Every peso of Cuban planter wealth produced by enslaved people delivered to Citibank. And Citigroup only acknowledged in 2023 that Citibank of New York likely profited indirectly from enslaved labor in Cuba. The Aldama family was inside that structure of cooperation with Wall Street for decades before 1868. When Miguel Aldama fled to New York in 1869 and became the founding member of the Cuban junta, he arrived at the office of his family's banker. The junta's property contribution model, where planters pledged their Cuban estates as capital into the Revolutionary Fund, was the exact same structure Moses Taylor had been using to aggregate and invest in Creole wealth since the 1840s. The Cuban flag was designed in New York City in 1849 by Narciso Lopez, a Cuban-Venezuelan Freemason. The equilateral triangle in the design is explicitly Masonic. I'm running out of time again. Go to part 5. Cinco.